9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, and it is the end of the year. And so we are going to spend a little bit of time looking backwards at the year. And then in tomorrow's episode, we'll spend some time looking forward to next year. And of course, we have our friends and advisors and gurus here to help us with that, including, of course, Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center. How are you doing, Rosa?
I'm fantastic, David. This year can't end quickly enough.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it seems to be moving on apace. To me, it's like, is it still summer? And no, it's not. And we have Kori Schake from beautiful California. How are you doing today? And of course, AEI. How are you doing, Kori?
I am doing exceedingly well. As you point out, I am home in California, so complaining about 60-degree weather in December. I do, however, want to caution Rosa that while I ordinarily wear the tiara of optimism and she the thorny crown of entropy, she is glad for the year to be over because it was so tiresome and demanding. And I just want to point out, you are underestimating how much worse 2025 can be, Rosa.
No, I just hadn't gotten up to that yet. I was going to say this year can't end soon enough. And in fact, I'd like us to fast forward immediately to, say 2029.
We'll all be somewhat older then, except for you
right.
guys. You guys who are eternal. Well, let me start with one question that I've been thinking about a lot recently. That's not just sort of the past year, but the past 4 years. Some of you may recall in our listening audience that Joe Biden used to be the president of the United States.
Joe Biden, that name rings a bell.
Yeah, he's sort of shuffled off his presidential coil, at least. But, I think it's the time to look back and say, how'd he do in foreign policy? How'd he do over the course of the past 4 years? What kind of grade do you give him? So, Kori, let me start with you. While Rosa quickly Googles Joe Biden.
Thanks, David. I appreciate your time.
I give him a solid B-, because
I was going to give him B+, but that's only because I don't know who he is.
So a solid B- because as the world has grown more dangerous, he has grown more risk averse, which has its pluses and its minuses. But the main reason I don't give him a higher grade is that because as the world has grown more dangerous, defense spending has not kept pace with inflation in his budget. And he has projected America's anxieties in a way that I think has emboldened our adversaries. And thirdly, he has, throughout his administration, claimed that while he didn't favor big trade deals, they were going to do a lot of narrow bilateral and sectoral trade deals that would be good for the economy. And I believe they have accomplished 0 of those. The IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, is utterly without substance. And what America's allies in Asia, in particular, have been pleading for from an administration that has said that rebuilding America's alliances was their top priority. What allies are pleading for is an international economic policy that can help all of us reduce our reliance on China without destroying our own prosperity. And he didn't have anything to contribute to that. In fact, did worse by negotiating and refusing to sign an agreement with allies in Asia. So solid B minus.
Okay. Rosa, we will turn to you with this. We're also joined by our friend David Sanger, who is off in one of his many estates. David, we're starting our look back at the year with an assessment of Joe Biden's foreign policy and what the grade would be. And so I'll come to you after Rosa responds.
Well, let me just first put the same question to David Sanger. David, does the name Joe Biden ring a bell for you?
I think I remember. He was president before Donald Trump went out and made announcements pretending to be president a little bit early, right?
Correct. I think that's
guy?
right, because I had to quickly Google this because the name was just so lost in the midst of time. But I was going to say B. I'm going to do a little bit better, a little higher grade than Kori, I think. I think that the two, well, okay, let me highlight three things that keep me from giving him a higher grade. And then perhaps David Sanger, you'd like to talk about his actual achievements if you can think of any. I think the Biden administration's response on Israel and Gaza, which we've discussed a lot on this podcast, has been shameful, pretty much across the board, somewhere between lame and catastrophically awful, depending on whether you're experiencing a charitable mood or not. I think on Ukraine, although I have been more worried, I think, than Kori about the possibility of escalatory spirals in Ukraine, I would nonetheless very much agree that the dribs and drabs, a little this, a little that, somewhat randomly, has neither minimized the risk of escalatory spirals, nor has it actually helped Ukrainians in any particularly useful way. So it's sort of the worst of all possible worlds, frankly. So that's the second reason for a poor grade. I think, in a funny way, the recent decisions by the Biden administration to significantly empower the Ukrainian military much more than they had previously. Ironically, the risk of escalation is probably lower after the election with Trump in office. I don't think that Putin has any particular interest in escalating now that his pal is about to be in the White House. So it was sort of a safe moment for the Biden administration to allow greater flexibility on the Ukrainian side, but it was also, of course, too late for it to make a whole lot of difference. I fear. And I'd love for somebody to tell me that I'm wrong about that. But then the final third thing that I would highlight that makes me very unhappy with Joe Biden, and this is all just on the international security front, not on the domestic front, relates to what David Sanger, you just said. The fact that the White House appears to be perfectly content to let Donald Trump act like he has been president since November 5th is really kind of shocking. They've just sort of rolled over on that. I thought we were supposed to have one president at a time, and not even making any particular effort to suggest that ought to still hold is very, very consistent with the rather timid approach they've taken overall. So I'm going to go with B, and maybe I'm being nice to go with B.
Okay, David, before I tell which one of you is correct, you may have your shot.
Okay.
Grade Joe Biden's foreign policy.
So let me give you my components first, and then we can come to an overall averaging of grades. And then, of course, Rosa, since she's the former university administrator to all this, will then curve this up to an A, like all of our other
That's precisely what I'm going to have to do. You realize, no matter what you all say.
Yeah, well, David, just don't grade them as softly as you do all those Kennedy School students.
Okay. So first on the Mideast, I think is the lowest grade which would probably be a C or C minus, because he failed to use the American leverage that we had, which was our arms packages, in order to keep Prime Minister Netanyahu from running rings around him. And so Netanyahu went off and did what he was going to go do. Now, this has been tempered by the fact that Netanyahu turned out to have been right to ignore Biden when Biden said, don't attack Hezbollah because it will turn into a regional war. It turned out Hezbollah collapsed. They got 80% of the missiles. They decapitated the leadership. And that led pretty straight on to the collapse in Syria. I would give a better grade for Ukraine, in part because I think the pressure he kept up on the Russians managed to be one of the reasons that Assad is no longer around. When Assad had to go turn to the Russians, there were no North Koreans left to send him. So I think I would give him probably a B plus or A minus on Ukraine.
Ooh, generous.
And that may be generous. I agree that the weaponry came too slowly. But the biggest critique I have here is for the U.S. Congress, which just wasted months and months and months on the money going across. I agree that he was too reactive and too slow on the weaponry and allowing the fire into Russia. I don't think at the end of the day it probably would have made that big a difference. On cyber, I would give a C at most. If you ask people in the national security realm, what's the scariest thing you've seen in the past year, they will all say Salt Typhoon, which is the Chinese invasion into the U.S. telecom system. Got the Chinese, as we've written many times now, into the FISA warrant system, managed to turn our own ability to listen in on phone calls with warrants against us and listen into actual conversations. The U.S. government did not see this coming. The telecoms didn't see it coming. How this could happen in 2024 is pretty remarkable. It took Microsoft to go raise the flag, and they, of course, had their own difficulties this year. But the president has come out and spoken about this problem, which his aides will tell you is sort of the most urgent national security issue we have, precisely 0 times, which I find astounding. I mean, they've spoken more about drones, which everybody is insisting is not a national security threat, and I agree. I don't think what we're seeing here in New Jersey is anything other than somebody looking for David's boyhood homes. But we've gotten no discussion on that topic. On China, I'm a little more sympathetic than Kori was, because I actually think the thing that has hurt the Chinese the most of all of the steps that they have taken has been the export controls on advanced chips and on the equipment to go make them, the ASML machines. And there, I think he cut entirely new ground, did things that went way beyond what Trump was discussing in the first term. And I suspect you'll see the Trump folks hold on to that policy and probably try to expand it. So I do that. I give them better there. So if you average all these out, you probably get a B before Rosa gets to her curving.
Interesting. None of you have mentioned Afghanistan, which I think a lot of people would have led with.
Time.
Yes, lost in the midst of time, no doubt. I'm not going to chime in or cover the ground you've all covered. I think Kori's right. I think B minus is about right. I think the thing that I think was the biggest contribution, although I fear it will be undone soon, is expanding NATO and giving new impetus to that alliance. And his first instincts in Ukraine were good, but subsequently every red line that we drew in Ukraine was wrong, and it hurt the Ukrainians ultimately. Certainly, the Mideast policy what was a mess. Indo-Pac was pretty good, but there were some flaws within it. Right, one of them, for example, was the tendency to be so China-centric that we were a little bit soft on people like Modi as he went after democracy in India, which I think we will later regret. I'm not quite as sanguine as David that the policies of denying the Chinese certain technologies will actually have the result that we want them to. And I think it may lead the Chinese to be out there marketing kind of.
I agree with that. It's just it's a temporary hold, and the question is, what do we do with that time?
And when we get to our discussion of next year, I think one of the interesting things to see will be the schizophrenia of the Trump administration in China. I think there will be some hawks, and I think there will be some people who want a deal, and I think it will be manifest in a president who is both a hawk and who wants to deal. And I think it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. Kori, pick me a world leader who's a big winner last year.
Xi Jinping's a big winner last year because despite the purported disaggregation of our economies, Americans continue to invest like mad in China, and supply chains aren't really moving that much, despite China overtly using them for political blackmail. He also cemented Russia's subordination because of their need for things China can produce, and because of the sanctions on Russia, that China is doing just enough to stay south of our response line for the aid they're providing. North Korea, which has been playing footsies with Russia, which China can't be that excited about, is getting its soldiers killed in Ukraine and failing to take advantage of opportunities that South Korea's political mess is providing it. So China looks ever taller, particularly in Asia, and well positioned to persuade President Trump to trade Taiwan for better terms of trade with China.
Yeah, a few more copyrights, a couple of deals more with Ivanka, and Taiwan can be yours. Rosa, pick a different winner, and no fair picking Olaf Scholz.
Well, I was going to say winner as somebody who has done good things, or winner as in lucky fellow. Because I was going to say, if we're just looking at sheer good luck, I think Netanyahu has done astonishingly well, right? I mean, if you were looking for assholes who have enjoyed a surprising run of good luck, as in not in jail yet, not ousted, and the happy recipient of things like the fall of Assad in Syria, that Netanyahu was in a position in which he was facing near global condemnation after October 7th, which is for his actions in Gaza, et cetera, internal resistance and potential rebellions within his coalition and within Israeli society, and then a combination of he gets lucky because Joe Biden, as we've discussed, had completely unwilling to use what leverage we had, and then he gets luckier because of a series of own goals on the part of Hezbollah and on the part of Hamas help him out a little bit, and then he gets further lucky because most recently Assad's departure creates all these new opportunities for him, weakens regional enemies, and so somehow despite everything, there he is. He's still standing. And because everybody has extremely short memories, half the world has already forgotten about Gaza because we've moved on to new exciting sources of regional conflict and shifts in the regional balance of power. So that is one lucky fellow. He doesn't make him less of a criminal. But I think he's had, all things considered, a much, much better year than he or anyone else might have expected.
Okay, David, go ahead. Say Taylor Swift.
Now you ruined it.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Okay. And how can you even think about a voice like Taylor Swift's when you've got Rosa and Kori on the?
True.
You probably would like Kori and me to sing now, wouldn't you?
That's right. We would.
Oh boy. Boy. Here we are. Well, this is probably our 10th year-end review, and so far we've avoided that.
But I've threatened to do it every year.
Yeah.
This might be the year.
So Rosa's exactly right. This was the astounding thing for Netanyahu is he's still in office. But he's not only still in office, he's still in office having destroyed Hezbollah and seen Assad flee here. He probably has a mixed emotion about that, and is now taking a little bit of new territory along, and that I can't imagine he's going to give up that buffer zone for very long. I would add to that that Erdogan of Turkey, he's a big winner at the end of the year. He's moving into parts of Syria that he has long sought and is going to try to use the opportunity to go after the Kurds along the way. Pretty terrible year, I would say, in many ways for Putin, particularly with the Assad part of this. And if you were the Ayatollah and you were, or the IRGC, and you were thinking about bad year, I would say really bad year.
Well, you've jumped ahead to my next question, and you've made it very hard then for Kori and Rosa to respond, because it was a bad year for Putin and it was a bad year for the Iranians. Anybody else you want to add to that list, Kori?
I just wanted to wait. Can I just add one more good year before we move on to bad years?
Yes.
I was just going to say Viktor Orban must be one happy guy, because the entire MAGA wing of the Republican Party, which is now about 98% of the Republican Party, is completely in love with him.
Yeah, and nobody's mentioned Trump as a winner this year, or Musk.
You said foreign leader. Otherwise, that would have been
foreign leader.
Yes. Well, okay. In that case, Musk. Go on, Kori.
Okay, someone for whom it has been a very bad year is Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Oh yeah.
Who President Trump is emasculating by talking about Canada as a 51st state and Trudeau as a governor. The Prime Minister of Canada has just had his closest political ally resign from what sounds like clumsy handling on his part. Namely, she was prepared to stay in her job, but he wanted to take her out of that and put her in something less influential, and she just stuck a knife in his chest.
Which he deserved.
His successor, if his party can ever recover from the profound unpopularity they are experiencing with the Canadian public. So,
and David Sanger, if she becomes the prime minister, then I think the failing New York Times becomes like the first newspaper of Canada, right?
Absolutely, particularly if Trump is successful in his effort to make it a 51st state.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out if it does become a 51st state, when I go to Canada to fish, do I have to get this Canadian fishing license, or do I get a state license?
No, because we are not going to acknowledge, if they're a 51st state. Well,
yeah.
Of course, the regulatory burden of getting fishing licenses will probably be lifted in a Trump administration.
Well,
because there will be no rule of law.
This is, Kori, you don't know this, but this is a major expense category for me. So if that regulatory burden was lifted, I mean, I understand the money's going for good purposes, like, restocking trout and salmon populations, which I support. But still, This costs a lot of money.
Yeah, this is what you expect from New York Times writers. Their fishing trips and the cost of upkeep on the 20 Lippenzahner stallions that he's got. Uh, Rosa, give us one more big loser.
Well, there are a lot of big losers. Let's face it, and it's actually hard to choose just one. Macron in France is obviously a big loser, but I also, of course, want to highlight the loser who makes me happiest being a loser in terms of very recent events, which is Bashar al-Assad.
Yes.
As I said in our last podcast, it is just couldn't happen to a better dictator. God alone knows what's going to happen in Syria, but nonetheless, it was impossible not to cheer when I saw the failing New York Times's great banner headline saying, that Bashar al-Assad had fled Syria to go to Moscow. I thought, hip, hip, hooray. This is whatever there is to come, impossible not to celebrate his demise. There is a genocidal tyrant who has presided over, horrific human rights abuses and a particularly brutal civil conflict for a very long time, and whose family has obviously held Syria in an iron grip for even longer. So he had a bad year, and I'm kind of happy about that.
So that's it for our quick rundown on the year that's just passed. And I would strongly encourage you, if you found that interesting, to hang around on this channel, this network, and listen to part 2, which will be a discussion of predictions for the year ahead, which we'll post tomorrow, which is Thursday. And for those of you who don't, but who are regular DSR listeners, you will know that the last week of the year is the year we usually do our best of, so people can go and listen to the best episodes of the year, and then we'll be back with the regular programming right after the new year, including some new twists and interesting things. So please stand by for that. For now, thanks very much, everybody, and do join us up for part 2.